Good evening, everyone. I'm so pleased you could join us. My name is John Drummond, and as you can see, hopefully, I'm being joined today by Richard Walker, who is the editor of the Sunday National. Hi, Richard. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Struggling on.
Good. Let me put a little bit of context in here before we get into the meat of the programme, if I may. You'll notice that the programme is called TNT. TNT, in this particular instance, stands for The Nation Talks. And so that's why we thought it was particularly appropriate that Richard could join us this evening, because Richard probably knows more about how the Scottish nation talks and thinks, for that matter. And we can get into your questions and also some of those which I think you might have wanted to ask Richard anyway. So we're looking forward to your feedback as we go along. The intention of this show, because it is The Nation Talks, is that you will actually talk to us, if you like. We want this to be interactive, as they say, and we welcome your comments. If you like what you hear, let us know. If you don't like what you hear, we'd particularly like to know that too. So that's a bit of context. Let me pose a few questions, if I may, of Richard, and then if you guys out there want to join us, feel free. You can send your questions, as you can see, on text at 07507 248 856, or you can contact me on my phone at john@cleish.com. That's John, John, at Cleish, CLEISH.com. When I talk to people in the South and call centres and mention Cleish, I've had an extraordinary variety of responses over the years, and a lot of emails have gone astray, perhaps, that what not to have done. Anyway, here we are. Richard is with us. I'm delighted that you can be here this evening, Richard. It's a real pleasure to talk to you again.
Thank you.
How are you? How are you coping with COVID-19?
I'm coping pretty well, to be honest. I'm producing the Sunday National from just under my stairs. And there's the rest of the team are in their own houses. We've been out of the office now for, I guess, pretty much since lockdown started. And of course, our office now is, the company has now left that office, so we're not quite sure where we're going to go back to at the end of lockdown, so we're waiting to find that out. So I guess we're going to be working from home for a wee while longer. But actually, to be honest, it's been okay technically. I think for me, producing newspapers is a team effort, and it's a little bit more difficult to have that kind of team ethos when you're all in your own homes. But we're trying to do that. There's all sorts of technical help for that, Zoom meetings and all sorts of different ways of communicating that we're making use of. So I think it's a different way of producing newspapers, but I think we're doing an okay job. I think the newspapers are pretty good. I think the National's excellent during the week, and I think the Sunday National's keeping its end up at the weekend. So yeah, I think we're doing well.
Bearing your blushes, I think, and maybe you'd expect me to say this as a columnist, but I have to say, I think you do an outstanding job.
Thank you.
I mean, it's a terrific read. We can perhaps come on later to talk about why it's a terrific read and why newspapers are not the same as social media, and they probably each play a part in the communications mix, but Definitely. They're not the same part, if I can term that. But let's learn a little bit more about you, Richard.
Okay.
Tell us about your career. I mean, I gather you're an alumnus of Kilwinning. Is that right?
I am. I went to in Kilwinning quite a long while ago. And then I kind of decided fairly early on to be a journalist. And at that time, I think it was Edinburgh College of Commerce, which was the only journalism course. And you could do it in two ways. You could either go before you got a job, or you could get a job as a trainee and then go as a block release, I guess, to the college. But I went to the college first before getting a job. And I went there for it was a year's course, and then I think it was a 3-year traineeship. And I worked in local papers in Ayrshire. It was the group was called the Guthrie Group. It was the Drossen Sockets Herald, the Irvine Times, Trinity Pressweek Times, Air Advertiser. Stayed there for quite a long while. I was editor of the Air Advertiser for a while, and then started a newspaper called the Ayrshire Leader. I started that for the Scotsman group, and then I went to work for Scotland and Sunday, which was, I was very lucky. That was my first job in national newspapers, and Scotland and Sunday was just an amazing experience. And then I went from there to the Evening Times. I worked at the Daily Record. I worked at the Scotsman. And then I started at the Sunday Herald about 2 months, I think, before it launched. And I eventually became editor of that, which was, again, an incredible experience. And, of course, the Sunday Herald was the first newspaper in Scotland to come out in favour of independence. So I was the guy behind that. And I left, in fact, just after that, after the independence referendum, we started the National as a kind of response to people who were reading the Sunday Herald and wanted a daily newspaper that reflected a pro-independence point of view as well. So we launched the National, did that. When it launched, we had a kind of week to establish it and to see how the readership would react to it. So that was tense, I think, would be fair to describe it. But it was an amazing response. And, after the week, we continued to produce it and, of course, still do so today. I left full-time there in 2015 and went to do a bunch of other things, and then came back to edit the Sunday National when we launched that just 18 months ago or something like that. So, yeah, it's been the National has been an incredible experience as well. And I mean, the relationship we have with our readers is really very heartwarming for us. We got a lot of support for our readers, and I think we're a necessary part of the Scottish media landscape. I think it was a strange situation where there were at one time no newspapers that supported independence, and then the Sunday Herald came out in favour of it before the referendum campaign. And of course, the referendum didn't go the way we wanted it to go. And I think before it, if you had asked us what would happen if Scotland voted no, we'd probably have said, well, it would have been quite dispiriting and bad for us. And it was, of course, not a happy experience. But I think we realised quite early on, quite soon after the vote, I mean, in fact, really a matter of hours after the vote, that the movement still existed, and the movement had not given up and would not give up. And there was still a huge job to be done to explain why independence was the best future for Scotland. And I think the Sunday Herald continued to do that for a while until, unfortunately, it closed. But the National and the Sunday National, I think, are doing a really important job in doing that.
I mean, it's just fascinating. I mean, I spent a wee bit of time in Ayrshire. If we can go back to, I'm not sure that this was part of the Guthrie stable, but I lived in Largs.
Oh, right.
The local newspaper. Was that part of the Guthrie stable?
It was. I used to go, when I worked at the Russell Socrates Herald, the editor of the Largs and Milport Weekly News, when he was on holiday, I would occasionally go up there and edit the paper while he was on holiday. Well, it was incredible those days, because that was before really the whole onset of computerization. So we would get, for instance, these local newspapers really relied to a large extent on local correspondence as well, and they would file their columns and their information on paper. So there wasn't email or anything like that at that time. So you would get, I remember in the Largs and Milport Weekly News, we would get the Milport notes, or whatever it was, some area notes. It was written in the inside of a shoebox. we would have to type it all out again. And, it was very, very different days. Very different.
I remember chatting to the editor once. He told me a lovely story. I said to him, it's always intrigued me how he was a little guy. I can't remember his name, McFadgen or something. And I said to him, it's always intrigued me how you keep in contact with your readers, because on the one hand, it's hugely important because that's what you're there for. Yeah. I mean, you can't get to anywhere else but first base unless you have a connection with your readers, just as you said earlier. I said, but how do you keep that connection? How do you know what it is they want? And do you get much feedback? I mean, what sort of feedback do you get? He said, well, the biggest feedback I ever got, and it was all negative, was about You'll love this. He says it was a story about a guy who was owned a 2-story place in Largs, and he was cleaning his windows, and the ladder slipped, and the poor man crashed to the pavement, and he was rather poorly, and they called for an ambulance. Before it arrived, he managed to crawl round the corner in hope that somebody might see him and offer some succour. So obviously the ambulance picked him up from where he was laying at that time. So the editor duly printed the story about so-and-so fell off a ladder and the ambulance arrived in such and such street. And he got this barrage of phone calls and letters saying, everyone knows that Willie doesn't live in XYZ Street. He lives in the corner.
Yeah. I mean, if you made a mistake like that in local newspapers, I mean, it was not long before you find out. There was phone calls and letters. Yeah. But you had some great times. I remember one we were reporting on a pet show, and the photographer was going to get the picture of the winner, and he brought it in on the Monday, and the picture of the winner was this girl holding up an empty cage, and I said to the photographer, that's the winner, but there's nothing in the cage. And the photographer said yes, that he had taken it was a budgie, and he had taken the budgie's picture, but the flash of the camera had entered his brainwave and killed it. I shouldn't laugh, but yeah, we had to go and check. Yeah, it was a sad story for the owner of the budgie, but it was
very sad.
Bit surreal.
I'll tell you another story which sort of summed up Largs for me. There was a public meeting once, and because I was a local community councillor, I was asked to chair it in Largs Academy, and it was about the frequency, or the poor frequency, or inadequate frequency of the rail service to Glasgow, which, as you know, is an important element of life in Largs. Yes. So we had about 300 people in the room, and it's all very well-mannered and very civilised in knowing Largs. And all of a sudden, this guy stood up at the front, a bit of a grizzled character, it would be fair to say, who was not unacquainted with the local hostelries, I suspect. And he stood up and he said, I want to ask a question about drunk drivers. And I said, sorry, drunk drivers? Yeah, guys who are drunk and they're driving the effing train. And I said, sorry, sir, with respect, can I stop you there? There are a number of members of the Fourth Estate here, and I said you'd have to be very cautious that you don't slander someone and libel them in some way and defame them. And he said, I don't care whose estate's here. I will not be muzzled, he shouted. And by this time, he had captured the attention of the whole crowd. Upon his every pronouncement was then eagerly awaited, and I said, well, I did try to help you, sir. Anyway, he said he wouldn't be helped. He said it's so and so, and he started naming names.
Oh no!
Who he had seen in the Sheeling having drinks before they boarded the train to drive it back to Glasgow.
Oops.
And we got all this chapter and verse about what a waster this one was and what a charlatan.
Yeah. While desperately trying to shut him up.
And, it was pointless. He was full-throated, and he was not to be stopped. As it happened, there was very little coverage of it. So, the editor must have figured, well, it's dynamite. I mean, and we're not going with that. But
yes, he probably wouldn't be able to say it because there was no proof.
No, I mean, though I have to say afterwards, as the hall was emptying, so many people came up to me and said, he's absolutely right, Yeah, I guess if the paper had been, thinking about doing it, they could have sent out photographer down to the bar and taken exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I think only 2 years later, the train ran into the buffers, and that was the reason. So the guy was absolutely one of the guys. Incredible.
Yeah. Well,
The other story I remember.
Local papers were an amazing training ground. You had to do so many stories that were difficult to do and difficult legally as well. So you had to negotiate with lawyers and things. So it was an amazing training ground for when you eventually went on to one of the national newspapers.
So how do people manage nowadays? For example, if I was sitting here as a prospective cub reporter, what advice would you give me?
Well, I mean, now, of course, a lot of people bypass local newspapers now in terms of their career. They will go to university and they'll come out and they'll be looking for a job in a national newspaper, and they'll be looking to specialise maybe quite early in their career. Personally, I don't think that's a great idea. I think it's a good idea to do as broad a range of material as you possibly can do before you decide what you want to do. And I think there's something to be said for going to university, absolutely, but I think there's also something to be said for just getting a grounding just by doing the job and learning on your feet with what we did in local newspapers. You make mistakes that way, absolutely, and sometimes difficult mistakes to deal with, and you you're learning as you go. But everybody makes mistakes anyway, so that's the only way to learn. And I for me personally, I wouldn't say it's the best way for everybody, but for me, that was the way I learned, and I enjoyed that immensely. And I think, again, one of the other things I would say to people is there's people who want to be broadsheet journalists or tabloids. For me, I think it was good. I did a range of both those things. I think it's very good sometimes to go to a tabloid newspaper, even if you want to be a broadsheet journalist later on, but you learn so many things. I worked at the Daily Record for a while, and you had to learn a lot of different ways of making sure the story was shorter than some of the stories were, for instance, in Scotland on Sunday, but still had all the relevant facts and was able to communicate, was able to be read by a wide range of people in society. And I think tabloid newspapers, when they're good, are just an amazing way of communicating with people. And some of the best investigative journalism and some of the best campaigns have been done by national newspapers. I know some people disagree with some of the things that you find in national newspapers in terms of celebrity gossip and things like that. But if a good tabloid newspaper can absolutely do a lot of good in the world and in society by shining a light on things that need to be brought into the light.
Yeah, it's interesting because I wonder how somebody coming from university and going straight into a newspaper acquires the breadth of experience that necessary to move up to the next, say, an editorial position. Because I assume that, it sounds to me like you might be very good, say, as a columnist, let's say, for example. But that may not equip you terribly well to edit a newspaper.
Well, I think that an editor's job is a very, very difficult job to define and say exactly, because I think every editor I know has done it in a slightly different way. Some editors come from a production background, so they'll be interested in the headlines or designing the pages. Some editors do not come from that background. They'll come from maybe a political correspondent background, and they'll be have a lot more, I guess, contact with politicians, and they'll shape the paper in a slightly different way. I mean, everybody has to do a bit of everything, but an editor's job depends largely on their range of skills and is interpreted differently by different people.
I can see that, but I mean, what are the biggest challenges in your job? And leaving aside having to do it under on the kitchen table right now, which is a different. Leaving that aside,
that is certainly different. Yes.
Yeah, assuming that we were living in normal times, and I'm not suggesting we'll ever go back to normal times, and we can talk about that later, perhaps. But what are the biggest challenges for you as an editor in producing a Sunday newspaper?
Right. in general, the Sunday newspapers are a different beast from dailies. They've got a different rhythm and they've got a different way of working. And they've also got quite a lot of frustrations attached, because if you get what you think is a really good story, maybe the lead story, and you get it on a Tuesday, you have to pray that story keeps from the Tuesday until the Sunday. And I have to say, it's quite often the case that it doesn't do that, and that somebody else put their hands on it. And then, of course, now with online, you've also got to weigh up, is the story going to last till Sunday, or should we put it up online today or tomorrow, or should we go early with it? And certainly, because the Sunday National and the National are obviously work very closely together, if we have a story that's not going to last for Sunday, we'll say to our colleagues in the Daily Nationals, we'll tell them about it. And also, if it works the other way also, if the people in the Daily National have got a story which needs quite a lot of space and maybe a wee bit of time to do a bit of digging to get the facts, they'll say to us, I'm working on this, and we'll factor to the Sunday. Because Sundays, generally, what you're trying to do is set the agenda for the week ahead. So you want to have stories on the front page and throughout the paper that people talk about, and that sort of set hairs running, and will let people know what is going to be in the political agenda. And the Sunday National and the National are obviously very strongly political papers. So we'll be looking to see what's going to happen in the political arena and what is liable to be coming up at Holyrood, or what is happening to shape the agenda. In particular, for the Sunday National, obviously, we're very interested in the independence movement and making sure that we cover the big debates that are taking place in that movement. I think some people think that it's, all you do is go on about independence, but actually the Yes movement is such a broad movement, and there's lots of debates happening about different aspects of independence that we have to cover. And I think many newspapers don't cover those things. And it's not just a homogenous movement, it's a movement that has got very different attitudes. Because I think what we're involved with doing really in the Yes movement is laying plans for nation building. So there's lots of different discussions and debates and different points of view over what shape and the independent Scotland would be. And I think that's the really exciting part about independence, is not campaigning to get independence, but also to try and envision what an independent country would be and what are the priorities for that country. And I think that will change, and I think COVID-19 will have a huge impact on what those priorities should be also. So doing a Sunday newspaper in general is about trying to set the agenda. Doing the Sunday National is you kind of layer on top of that what you need to do to make sure that if you are somebody who supports independence, if you're involved in the Yes movement, you have a newspaper that will give you information which kind of helps that debate along.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that makes so much sense. I want to interject here now and give you a question that's come through while we've been talking.
Okay.
Somebody has asked, because they've been watching, as many people have, the press conferences, the pressers that the First Minister's been doing on a regular basis. I have to say that when I compare how she performs versus her counterparts in Westminster, it's like chalk and cheese.
Yes.
However, what the questioner has pointed out is that she feels that some of the approaches by journalists are overly aggressive. In other words, rather than trying to elicit information, she feels that the journalists perhaps go somewhat over the top.
Right.
What's your view on that? Is that something you?
I think journalists, right? Your job as a journalist is you have the First Minister there, and your job is to ask relevant questions to get information that you believe your readers want or that you believe your readers need. Now, there are a range of politicians just now giving press conferences. Now, I think some of those people, I don't think Nicola Sturgeon is one of those people, but some of those people will not want to give the information, or also will have a fairly aggressive stance towards journalists. I'm thinking here of Donald Trump, who berates journalists at the conference and objects very much to being asked fairly basic, relevant questions. So journalists in that situation have to make sure that they hold Donald Trump to account and try and get him to answer the question. So I think it's difficult when you have a press conference like that to say, I'm going to have a different approach to this person than I would to that person. You need to make sure that you have a relatively consistent approach to politicians, and also to make sure that the question that you ask gets what you would consider to be a good answer. Sometimes, if you're looking at those things, you can think they're being a bit aggressive. I think sometimes that's the case, but not as often as you imagine. And I don't think Nicola Sturgeon would say that she's been given too hard a time. She might say that some of the questions she might consider them to be a bit irrelevant or a bit not particularly important in the grand scheme of things. And she's quite at liberty to do that, but she nevertheless answers the questions. But she's a politician. She's a seasoned politician. She is well able to deal with some antsy journalists sometimes. And sometimes journalists have to be antsy to get the questions answered properly from politicians. Not always from her. I think her press conferences are very clear, and she goes to great lengths to give the right answer. And some, I don't know how she's still standing, Nicola Sturgeon, actually, because she's got the responsibility she has, and the way she is continually on the front line and taking questions and having these conferences. I think she's doing an amazing job. But nonetheless, part of that job is to come under the scrutiny of the press. And I think they do that, the press do that in a relatively robust way. I don't necessarily think it's too robust for her. I think there is something to be said of a journalist who maybe their main aim is to catch a politician out or to catch the First Minister out. I don't think that's necessarily what the reader wants. I think, or the person who's watching it on television, I think what they want is to get the information. And I think the journalist's job is to make sure they get that information. And if they have to ask the question once or twice in a fairly robust way, I think that's fine. What I don't think it's their job is to try and make somebody look stupid. I think their job is to make that person, to hold them to account for what their job is.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense to me. And I accept your point that probably Nicola Sturgeon is not any form of shrinking violet here, and she can cope. And I suspect she welcomes. I may be wrong, but my sense of it is she rather welcomes robust questioning.
I think holding these press conferences to be held to account. She is saying that that's important in a free society that are held to account. She's also said that she will make mistakes, or she's probably already has made mistakes. And I think in hindsight, when you look back, sometimes you'll say, well, we could have done that a bit better. We did this well, we could have done that a bit better. And that's part of being human. People make mistakes. I think if they do, then the best thing to do is to say that in hindsight, we could have done that better. Let's move on now and make sure that we do it better next time, or we handle this better next time. And I think the press has a role to play in improving the way things are done, because it's up to them. If they are talking to a politician, if they're talking to the First Minister and their readers, or they have information which suggests something went wrong in some aspect of it, I think there's nothing to be gained by brushing it under the carpet. You have to face up to something went wrong. Let's find out what caused it, and let's make sure that we minimise the chances of it happening again. And I think that's a democratic process, and the press have a really important role to play in that.
I wonder how you feel about another aspect of it, because it seems to me that, in a sense, the press are under some pressure here now, because if you take a typical press conference like the one today, the First Minister was answering questions about an outbreak in a hotel in Edinburgh at some conference sponsored by Nike. And what struck me was how things have changed. I mean, for example, in the old days, before the pandemic, which wasn't so very long ago, journalists would go to a press conference and they would put questions, and there would be a follow-up, perhaps, or maybe two depending on how indulgent the interviewee happened to be. And then they would make notes and they would go and write their copy. Now, there's a very different aspect to it, it seems to me, which is the journalist asks the question. There's no follow-up because there's somebody else waiting.
Yeah.
And more importantly, because everyone has seen the press conference, it ceases to be a private matter between the media, the press, and the interviewee.
Uh-huh.
You now have people who are able to go on social media and say to the journalist, this was not what she said.
Yeah.
And by the way, here is a clip.
Or not saying what you said.
Yeah. And you think, hold on a second. The last generation of journalists didn't have to go through all of this.
No, but that's good as well, because just as politicians need to be held to account, so do journalists need to be held to account. So I don't think there's anything we need to be frightened of if we're doing our jobs properly, from social media or people on social media saying that's not what happened. And famously, I guess, during the 2014 campaign when Alex Salmond was accused of not answering a question, and social media was full of clips of him answering the question. Yeah. I think social media is a very has become a tool by which the press are held to account as well, which is fine. Bring it on. It's great. Yeah. I don't think we need to be frightened of that, but it's good in a way to make sure that journalists have got the right end of the stick when they report on things.
Okay, let me just recap for people who may just have joined us. My name is John Drummond. The show is called TNT. That's The Nation Talks, and we are speaking tonight with Richard Walker, who's the editor of the Sunday National. If you want to ask Richard or me, but I should imagine Richard's a much more interesting person to ask questions of, you can text 07507 248 856. And we just had a question came in just as I was giving that information. You can also write to john@cleash.com if you prefer to use emails. Okay. The question that popped up, which has gone again, and perhaps somebody could bring it up again, I think was about Nicola Sturgeon. If we could stick it back on the screen again just for a second.
If you could ask Nicola Sturgeon anything, what would it be?
Yes, well remembered. Excellent. Yes. Thank goodness you're here, and thank goodness you're a journalist and you remember things. Yes. Okay.
Yes.
What question would you ask her if she were here right now?
Geez, I don't know. I'm kind of interested in. There's a sort of political side of it and there's a personal side of it. I said before that she's bearing up well to incredible pressure, incredible responsibility. I would quite like, I suppose, to find out what kind of techniques she uses to get her through. Every one of us have those long, dark nights of the soul. Mm. And in this situation, that must be even more true. I don't know. I would like to know what techniques she uses to cope and how she deals with that pressure, because it is incredible. And also because, like all of us, she's making sacrifices in terms of being in touch with her family and being in touch with some friends, and that can be quite lonely. I mean, I think even I got a taste of it slightly when you're doing the paper, whereas you used to be in an office full of people and everybody was talking and it was very buzzy and people were throwing in ideas, and now that happens to an extent, but it doesn't happen to the same extent because you just can't. And sometimes you're sitting and you're sitting there and you're trying to do something and it's just you, and that's God. If I think that, God knows how much more so she's faced with that, and she's having to make massive decisions. Not decisions, not just like what headline am I going to put in this paper or what picture am I going to put there. Decisions that literally are matters of life and death, and that cannot be easy, and it must take its toll, and you must have to develop techniques to get you through that. Politically, I guess, I'm an independence guy. Our readers are independence people. I get completely the argument that you should not, that our focus here should be on defeating COVID-19, and our focus is to save lives, and that not to score political points. But I think there are lessons that we will learn from that in terms of, I mean, if the situations we have just now, where we have Boris Johnson's advice, which literally makes no sense. I mean, it's just bonkers advice. I think as well that it's advice that is confusing. If you are cynical, you might say it was designed to confuse, but it certainly is confusing. And he has his address to the nation last on Sunday. At no point did he make it clear that what he was saying applied only to England. I think people are rightly confused about what they're supposed to do here. I think Nicola Sturgeon absolutely is clear on what the advice is in Scotland. But I think, you know, if not everybody can get the distinctions or the inner workings of devolution, I think Boris Johnson was incredibly irresponsible. So I think now that there is some divergence between Westminster and Holyrood, I think we will learn from that. And I think I'd quite like, at some point, I don't think now is the right time, because I think there are other matters that need her attention. But I think at some point, I would quite like to find out, you know, what lessons she would take from how the different Holyrood and Westminster dealt with this crisis.
I think, frankly, I think if you were able to do that, the paper would sell out in minutes. Because I suspect, you know, that's a subject that, frankly, would be of interest to hundreds, if not thousands, of people.
Yeah.
You know.
So I think she would not. I think she'd be right not to answer it just now, because I think I think she's right not to try and not to make political capital out of COVID-19. I think that's an example that other politicians, naming no names, would be better to follow. And I think she's right not to do that. But when it becomes a right time to examine the lessons we need to learn from this, I think that would be interesting to hear.
But that lesson you talked about earlier is one that could be used now, which is you are coping remarkably well. Other people aren't. What are your secrets for coping that would be of help to others?
No, absolutely.
I mean, leaving the politics aside, I mean, you're right, that's for another day. And nobody really wants to go there. But I think a lot of people would be immensely interested in how she manages to cope.
Yeah.
Because on the face of it, it doesn't seem possible to cope with the extraordinary pressure.
Yeah.
And unremitting pressure.
Yeah.
The rest of us
are
subjected to pressure, but you know, it happens at certain times.
To an extent, she would say, well, don't just look at how I'm coping, look at the people in the NHS that are on the front line, and you know, they're the heroes here. Yeah. And that's true, and it's a genuine point to make. Yeah. And you know, these people are also dealing with life and death matters in a way that is truly heroic. But nonetheless, she is because she carries the can. She has a burden of responsibility. Yeah. And she's dealing with it well. So yeah, it's an interesting question. Interesting.
Well, I hope you're able to ask her that question sometime soon, because I think that a lot of people would be interested in the answers. Another question has come in. It's really about the economics of newspapers. I mean, how is the Sunday National performing in these times? People are asking.
Well, these times are difficult for newspapers. Newspapers are in a difficult situation anyway. Newspapers, journalism has always been subsidised. Newspapers have subsidised journalism by advertising traditionally. And you know, when I started in journalism, the general income from newspapers from circulation was dwarfed by the income from advertising. And clearly the internet has made that very different. And now it's the for instance, we used to have page after page after page of property advertising or jobs. Those adverts have largely disappeared, and with it, the money that those kind of revenue streams brought into us have disappeared also. So that has made our job very difficult in terms of we don't have the resource that we used to have. We don't have the numbers in the newsrooms that we used to have. So we work. I mean, I'm not trying to say we're we're superheroes or anything like that. We are paid and we do our job, but nonetheless, our job is more difficult, and we have to use different. I guess we have to work harder and work in a more resourceful way and work smarter to produce newspapers, and therefore it was difficult anyway to do that. This situation, COVID-19, has reduced advertising to virtually nil. The money that's coming in is much, much less than it was. And for newspapers, all newspapers, that's difficult. For the National, it is difficult because our circulation is healthy and was absolutely letting us survive, but it wasn't the circulation that Daily Record has or anything like it. So the money the revenue is not what it was, and therefore we need to make sure that we are making enough money for us to survive. The National is not a charitable thing. We don't produce our newspapers as an act of charity. We sell them. It's a commercial enterprise, and we won't be able to do that if we don't bring in enough money. So that's why you'll see in the National, you'll see lots of requests for people to take out subscriptions, because subscriptions are a good way for us. We know that's regular income, and it really helps us to plan, and it lets us know at least we'll have a bottom line of money coming in.
Yeah.
So basically, if people value the National, then it really helps us if they take subscriptions or if they buy subscriptions for other people. I mean, we have readers that have bought the paper from day one, and they buy the paper and they've got a digital subscription, and they're massive fans, and we are incredibly grateful to those people. They've even offered to donate money to the paper, which we can't really do. We can't really accept donations for money because as I say, we sell it. We sell our journalism and we sell it. And if you want to buy it, that's brilliant. But we're not, we don't ask for money from you just for that. You really ask money as a transaction. We will give you this if you give us this money, and that's really the way it should be.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
A couple of other questions that have come in. One is about this new party that has emerged, which is going to fight the so-called lists.
Yeah.
What's your take on that?
I mean, I don't want to despise people's attempts to bring about independence to Scotland. That's fine. Me personally, I think we've got to focus on the 2021 election. The SNP are still the biggest, by far, the biggest political show in town. And there's another independent party in the Greens that, if you particularly don't want to vote for the SNP, you've got an alternative already. Basically, I want to see in 2021, I want to see the largest number of SNP MSPs returned as possible. And if we can get some Green MSPs in there as well, thumbs up to that. I think the other parties, I think there's been a frustration among some parts of the yes movement that the SNP has been too cautious, and I think there are frustrations among people who want to move faster. I think all of us are frustrated, not necessarily at the SNP's caution, but we're all frustrated that we want to campaign, we want there to be a referendum, and we want Westminster not to stand in the way of that. And Westminster is standing in the way of that, and therefore we're frustrated that how do we get around that? And I'm not sure what the answer to that is, and I'm not sure any of these other parties will help us to get around that. I think currently the best way to show Westminster that we want a referendum and that we're prepared politically to act to get one is to vote SNP in the 2021 election. And I think that might change if we vote in substantial numbers and return as many MPs, SNP MPs, as we get. And Westminster is still not going to do that. I think we need to have some strategy in place to work out what we're going to do. But right now, the strategy is to send a message in 2021 to Westminster that we are determined to have a say in our future. Yeah. And the best way to do that is to vote SNP. And if you can't vote SNP for whatever reason, if you don't want to do that, vote Green. I don't really want too many alternatives. I know they say they're only going to stand on a list, but I still, I don't really want to. I want it to be focused on those parties just now. After 2021, if voting for those parties does not bring about the desired effect, then at some stage we're going to have to say, right, what else do we do here? But I don't think 2021 is the time to do that.
Okay. I mean, I think maybe part of the motivation for any new party, obviously, is to be a ginger group of some kind. It's not uncommon. If you look at independence movements across the world over in the historical context, there's invariably been a whole range of independence parties. Yeah. I suppose the difference in Scotland is that they're all concentrated in one area, which is I would call left of centre. Yeah. Normally in independence movements, there's a left-wing independence movement and a right-wing independence movement, and they don't go on for that reason. Yeah. But when the crunch comes, they vote collectively in order to achieve their common goal. Yeah. But these are usually in countries that have a written constitution, so everyone knows how it's all going to shake down thereafter because it's been agreed. Scotland isn't like that. It means there would probably be a free-for-all. But I want to move on to a couple of other things, if I may. One is, when do you think the next Indie Ref will be?
Oh, gosh. I hope 2022, 2023. Do I think that's likely? I think... I suspect that no matter what the result in 2021 is, we will still face some resistance to the idea from Westminster. Yeah. I hope that the vote in Scotland will be enough to knock that resistance down. Yeah. And if it's not, I would like to see quite quickly some organisation or some campaign or strategy to get around that. Because if we can't get a referendum along the lines of the 2014 referendum, what can we get, and how can we get to independence without that? And I think those are big questions, and I think we need big minds to be set the task of coming up with answers to that.
Yeah. I think that's a fair point. Another question's come in. I'd like to come back to an element of that, if I may. We're sort of running out of time a little bit. We've got about 12 minutes. But somebody has asked what your view is on government funding of local newspapers.
Right. I think there are definite business model problems with newspapers and journalism. And I think it's really important that journalism finds a way to survive. And I think there are models throughout the world of ways of helping that to happen. Clearly, there are dangers of relying on government money for your survival, because that would potentially mean that your criticism of the government of the day would be muted, because if you could criticise them too strongly, you're going to be closed down, potentially. Again, there are examples throughout the world of governments subsidising journalism in ways that have within them mechanisms for making sure that the government can't control what the press say. Because I think most of us would agree that we don't want the governments to control what the press say, because that's maybe if you support the government, that's not the worst thing that can happen in the world right now. But if once the government changes, you could have a different government, and then they would make the press do different things. I think you've got to make sure there is not that ability. You need to make sure that journalism remains independent. I think
we do have a model in this country.
Sorry?
We have a model in this country already, which is the BBC.
Absolutely. And the BBC is, I mean, that's a problematic model as well. We could go into that and it'll take forever. But I personally am a bit concerned that the BBC's online operations are a challenge to commercial online operations, and it's subsidised by the licence payers. And I'm not sure that if we were to go back 15, 20 years, that we would have done it the same way. But nonetheless, we are where we are. There is a model for the BBC, and there can be models, I'm sure, for helping newspapers produce journalism in circumstances that we find ourselves where we can't currently subsidise journalism by advertising. And I think we need to make sure that that journalism remains a vital part of democracy. And I think we need to turn our attentions at some stage, especially if we are having, especially in the case of independence, what press does an independent Scotland deserve, and how do we make sure that there are the resources to provide that? Because currently, I don't think there are. And I think we would need to find a way of making sure that we get the press we deserve.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I mean, one of the rather odd characteristics of Scotland is that in many respects it is independent, but in other respects the institutions are very flawed. The BBC, for example, in Scotland has no democratic accountability, which is a flaw. And eventually, that does impact trust levels, because unlike the Sunday Herald, you respect your readers' views. A model that's funded otherwise doesn't necessarily have to do that, which seems to be one of the flaws.
I think as well, though, I think the BBC does very many things very well. I'm not one of these people who criticise them just for the sake of it, but I think there is a flaw in BBC Scotland in that I'm not sure that I understand what the BBC Scotland believes itself to exist for. And I think it either exists to provide jobs for creative people, which is not a bad ambition, but it needs to be, for me, it needs to be beyond that, and it needs to provide programmes where I see the country I live in reflected properly in them. I don't mean that in a very po-faced way, but I do want to see drama, for instance, that is rooted in Scotland. It does that sometimes. We saw The Nest recently, which was very strong. So yeah, it doesn't do enough of it, I think. So I think there should be some way of having that discussion about what BBC Scotland is actually for.
Maybe what we should do is, if you've got the time, not necessarily right now, but maybe at some future stage we can develop that a little bit further and see what means there might be to introduce some democratic accountability. Because I think if that were the case, there's a degree of sensitivity that would accompany that, which would address that point. Yeah. Because one would then feel a wish to respond to the needs of the locality, if I can term in those terms, in the programming, for example.
Yeah. I think as well there's the BBC's own kind of polling suggests that Scotland is the part of the UK that has least trust in the BBC to accurately reflect the country. I mean, you could argue why that is or whatever, but I think the BBC needs to look at it and think, right, why is this?
Yeah. A question that's come in, and you might not want to answer this. Do you think that Rupert Murdoch has lost confidence in the government?
Well, if he has, he wouldn't be the only one. Would he? Lost confidence in the UK government.
Yes.
I mean, the last few days, swathes of people have lost confidence in the UK government. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. I've never seen any country so enraged by its own government as I have recently. It's just been incredible.
Yeah, it has been an interesting ride, I have to say, watching all of this take place. It's so very, very odd. Well, Richard, we've almost come to the end of our time. I think we've got about 5 minutes to go.
Okay.
Is there anything that you would like to say to the folks watching? Because you've got a couple of minutes there.
I think I think that people in the independence movement, and not just the independence movement. I think right now there's a kind of I'm not sure that journalism is as valued as it should be, and I can see why not. I mean, because people get disillusioned, and particularly on the independence movement, because there's so few journalists in mainstream media who kind of voice the views or support the views that they do. And I understand their frustrations. I don't quite know. There's no way of legislating for that. I think that there was a problem and remains a problem about Scottish journalism in so far as I don't know whether most countries would expect to have more papers supporting independence. I think that would be, and it doesn't happen, so people get frustrated. But nonetheless, I think journalism itself, I mean, there are things that are not everything has to do with independence, and journalism exists to hold those in power, whoever they are, to account. And I think that is a valuable role to play. You might not be happy that you might believe that role is not, that role isn't serviced properly by journalism, but the role itself, I think we need to accept that is a valuable role to have. And I absolutely hold people to account for not doing that properly, but I think we need to accept that that's a role that is worth playing.
Yeah.
And how do we help people to do that? And how do we support the principle of a strong, robust, independent journalism that holds people to account? And I think right now we need to turn our attention to that, because we run the risk of losing it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a very fair point. Okay. Thank you very much, Richard. We need to wrap up now. We've only got a couple of minutes to go. Okay. A timer has gone off somewhere in this house. I hope it's not a portent of something nasty on the way. I want to thank you once again for giving up valuable time. You've got a paper to produce, and you've given us a full hour here, which we're more than grateful for, I have to say. I hope at some stage in the future this hasn't been sufficiently off-putting not to have you back again. I'd like to feel you could come back and talk some more.
Happy to do so.
Because I think we only scratched the surface in so many respects. So, and judging by the number of questions that came in, we probably haven't been able to give all of them enough justice. Yes. And I think you would probably like the chance to do that.
I would.
Terrific. Okay. Sorry, do you have any last points you want to make before you go?
No, I'm good.
Good. I hope you've enjoyed it. I just want to say to everyone watching, that was Richard Walker, editor of the Sunday Herald. You need to rush out and buy a copy of the Sunday Herald. And the Sunday National, I do beg your pardon, and the National itself. If you're not a subscriber, you need to be a subscriber of both the Sunday National and the National. You also need, please, to support Indie Live. There's a crowdfunder, you can find it. Kevin Gibney will give you the details. Do help him, because he's doing an absolutely sterling job. Somewhat limited resources. And he put all of this together tonight. He deserves a round of applause. if we could do such a thing. Next week at 7 o'clock, next Tuesday, we'll be talking to another very interesting guest who will be talking about some of the aspects of what happens in Vietnam and elsewhere, and talking about his career. Glad you could join us. It's been my great pleasure to have participated in this today, and I hope we can welcome you all next week, 7 o'clock. Don't miss it, Indie Live. Thanks again for watching. Take care. Be safe. Keep well. Thank you.
Great.
Okay, and hope you enjoyed that show, folks. There'll be more next week with the TNT Show and John Drummond. So please do tune into that. There'll be more details nearer the time. And I'm going to play it with some little videos for Indie Live Radio and Independence Live. So do stay with us for a little bit longer, and let's listen to a few of the crew that are on Independence Live. If I can get it working, of course. Here we go.
Hi, I'm Fiona from Clackman and Show Women for Independence. Did you know we have a podcast on Indie Live Radio? Goes out at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, repeated at 6 o'clock on a Thursday. Come and join us for some news, views, opinions, the odd poem. It'd be very nice to have you with us. And come and hear the news you're not getting. Here's some new voices for a new Scotland at Indie Live Radio.
Hi, this is Marley, and I'm here to tell you a bit about Daytime Live Show, which goes out Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays on Indie Live Radio at 11:30 for a couple of hours. So I present the programme along with Val, and we're there with a variety of guests to chat to each day. Now, at the moment, Wednesday's show is a catch-up edition. It's not live. What we do is we rebroadcast some of the more recent interviews. So we hope we enjoy all of those. Be there at 11:30 on Indie Live Radio for the news you don't hear elsewhere. A new voice for a new Scotland.
Hello, my name's Steve B, and I'm a presenter on Indie Live Radio. I present Music and Musings every Friday night at 7. The music, that's 70s classic rock, although we will take the occasional side road. The musings, well, they're thoughts on Scottish independence, politics and world events from my viewpoint, which is that of a grumpy old man. So join me every Friday night at 7 on Indie Live Radio, a new voice for a new Scotland.
Hi, James E here from the Saturday Show on IndieLive.radio. We play a wide selection and wide genre of music for your entertainment. We're on Saturday mornings from 10 till 1 p.m. Remember, join us on IndieLive.radio, a new voice for a new Scotland.
film. You can watch this again. You can be part of it. It's Independence Live. Yeah. A few people asked about YouTube. It'll be YouTube/Independence Live. That's where you'll find the footage.
No Westminster, no Westminster, come on. No Westminster, not for me, not for me. But before I'll be your slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Oh, freedom, come on. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. One more. Oh, freedom over me, over me. But before I be your slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free.
Okay, folks, that's us for tonight. Take care, be safe, and we'll be back with you again soon. You can always catch us on the radio. We've got 24/7 radio, IndieLive.radio. Go there. You can get the iOS, Android app. We've also got an Alexa skill you can get. All links and all that for all these things are via the website. Okay, folks, back with Independence Live very soon again. Bye for now.